He was a baseball legend on the field, but Don Drysdale lived a life filled with silent struggles behind the fame. He threw fastballs like thunder, but no one knew the storms he faced off camera. At just 56, he died alone in a hotel room. His passing was tragic, but his life might be even more heartbreaking. Why did someone so admired live such a sad, quiet existence? Stay with us. Don Drysdale was a man of extremes. He played with fire in his eyes and lived with a kind of quiet loneliness that very few saw coming. His death at just 56 years old hit like one of his infamous fastballs. Hard, unexpected, and leaving everyone stunned. But it's the way he lived that leaves a lasting ache. When people remember Don Drysdale, they often remember the brushback pitches, the glare from the mound, the 6'5" frame that scared even the game's biggest stars. But behind that tough exterior was a man constantly trying to prove something to the fans, his peers, maybe even himself. Don didn't grow up destined for baseball greatness. He was just a tall kid from Van Nuys, California, whose dad once chased the baseball dream but gave it up to raise a family. Don was a second baseman in high school until one year, someone decided to try his arm on the mound. 1-10-1 season later, the Brooklyn Dodgers signed him for $4,000, and just like that, the boy was gone. It all looked like a dream from the outside. Rookie year, complete game wins. By his mid-20s, he was an all-star. In 1962, he was the best pitcher in baseball, taking home the C.Y. Young Award. In 1968, he broke Walter Johnson's record for consecutive scoreless innings. But there was always someone in the shadows. Or maybe Drysdale was in someone else's. That someone was Sandy Koufax. Drysdale and Koufax were a legendary 1-2 punch, the most feared pitching duo in the game. But Koufax got the spotlight, the magazine covers, the headlines. Drysdale got the comparisons. And that weighed on him. He was never allowed to be excellent in his own right. He had to be as great as Sandy. And yet, Don kept showing up, game after game, pitching through injuries, silence, and sometimes pain beyond his shoulder. He threw inside. He hit batters, 154 of them, a National League record. And if anyone messed with his teammates, he ensured they paid for it. That was his rule. If one of his guys went down, two of yours did. Don didn't care who you were. Willie Mays, a future Hall of Famer? Didn't matter. You dug in too confidently? He'd give you chin music. That fire made him a champion. But it also isolated him. Teammates respected him, but few truly knew him. Off the field, Drysdale was notoriously private. The fame and the adoration were never something he craved. And when it came, he didn't always know what to do with it. He wasn't just dealing with pressure on the mound either. In public, the constant attention from fans became exhausting. He tried to stay composed, but now and then, the 1% of him that couldn't be managed showed up. Like when a drunk fan mistook him for Sandy Koufax at a Hollywood restaurant and ruined his dinner. Don did his best to stay polite. Until she dumped her purse on his plate, that's when the switch flipped. But the reaction wasn't about fame. It was about everything that had built up inside him. The expectations, the comparisons, the need to protect his space because he rarely had any. And just like that, the story of a man who gave everything to the game started to sound like someone quietly screaming for a break. When Don Drysdale hung up his cleats in 1969, it wasn't because he wanted to. His shoulder was wrecked, torn rotator cuff. No real options back then. Surgery wasn't what it is today. He'd pushed his body to its limit for 14 seasons, starting more than 35 games, 9 years in a row. Eventually, even the fiercest warriors run out of ammo. But Don wasn't done with baseball. He just changed his seat from the pitcher's mound to the broadcast booth. And in some ways, he was just as powerful with a microphone as with a baseball. From the 1970s into the early 90s, Drysdale became a familiar voice on the airwaves. Eventually, he made his way back to the Dodgers. The fans loved his insight, his stories, and his deadpan delivery. He wasn't flashy. He didn't try to outshine the moment. He let the game breathe. But the truth is, broadcasting was never about fame for Don. It was about staying close to the game. The only world he'd ever known. Baseball was his language. The booth gave him purpose. Still, behind that voice was a man who seemed to carry something heavy, something he never quite talked about. There were moments when that internal pressure would surface. One infamous incident happened in 1979 on a team plane with the Angels. Don called out pitcher Jim Barr, accusing him of faking an injury to avoid pitching in the playoffs. It got heated. Barr pushed back. Manager Jim Fregosi stepped in. Voices were raised. Things nearly turned physical. Drysdale later apologized, but the incident stuck. It was not because of what was said, but because it showed that Don's intensity didn't end when his playing days did. He still held people to that same impossible standard he had for himself. The booth gave him a second career, but it didn't fix the things baseball never really addressed, such as the mental toll of always being on. Don was private, guarded, the kind of guy who might shake your hand and smile but never let you in too far. Even when he remarried in 1986 to basketball legend Ann Myers and had 3 children together, there was still a sense that Don never wholly let the world in. He'd been hardened over time. He was conditioned to keep his exposures buried. By 1993, Drysdale was a fixture in Dodgers broadcasts, often alongside the legendary Vin Scully. Fans loved hearing their voices guide them through the highs and lows of each season. The Dodgers were in Montreal that year, and Don had just finished calling another game. The following day, he didn't show up for the bus to the stadium. No calls, no signs. People thought he was running late, but when hotel staff went up to check on him, they found him lying face down on the floor. He was gone.
And I say it to you as best as I can with a broken heart. Don Drysdale, who had a history of heart trouble, you may remember a couple of years ago he had angioplasty, and he was found dead in his hotel room, obviously a victim of a heart attack, and had passed away during his sleep. He was not on the team bus today, but we thought perhaps he had taken a cab. We tried to reach him at the hotel. There was no answer, and a little while ago, we found out what had happened.
Something stood out among Don Drysdale's belongings in that Montreal hotel room: a worn cassette tape. It wasn't music or a game highlight, it was a recording of Robert F. Kennedy's victory speech from the night he won the California primary in 1968. Just hours later, Kennedy was assassinated. That night, Drysdale had pitched his 6th consecutive shutout. 2 unforgettable moments collided in time. Don had carried that tape with him ever since. What did it mean to him? No one knows. But it could be a reminder of how quickly greatness can be silenced, or how success and tragedy often walk side by side. Maybe, in some way, Don saw himself in that recording, achieving something extraordinary in a moment overshadowed by loss. At his funeral, voices from the baseball world filled the chapel. Vin Scully, Orel Hershiser, Tommy Lasorda. They spoke of his fire, his loyalty, his dry humor. They spoke of a man who gave everything to the game and lived it as fully and fiercely as anyone could. But what they couldn't speak to, what none of them touched, was how deeply lonely that life might have been. How hard it is to be the enforcer, the tough guy, the rock, and still feel like you're standing just a step outside the circle. And in the end, that's what made Don Drysdale's life so quietly tragic.